The Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Rebbe of Lubavitch, had a coachman, and his name was Pesha der Balagole. Pesha, Pesach. It's interesting that the Rebbe Rashab and Pesha, they were both in Cheder together when they were little kids. And then later, the Rebbe Rashab became the Rebbe, and Pesha became his Balagole. And Chassidim used to ask Pesha, what kind of business is this? You went to Cheder together with the Rebbe, and he became a Rebbe and you became a Balagole. What's going on over here? So he said, very simple. Is geworden, was sein Tate is, und nicht geworden, was mein Tate is. He became like his father. His father was a Rebbe, he became a Rebbe. And I became like my father. My father was a Balagole, and I also became a Balagole. This is what Pesha used to say. But the Chassidim always wanted to get out of Pesha what's called in Yiddish, Soides für Cheder, secrets from when they were little children in Cheder. And Pesha never, because of the respect for the Rebbe, he would never discuss things that happen in Cheder. But one time the Chassidim took him, and they gave him some mashke, and they got him, real high, and finally they were able to squeeze something out of Pesha. And Pesha said as follows: the Rebbe has such strange tastes, a modne mensch. Why? Pesha said he was from a poor family, from a Balagole. The Rebbe was from a rich family. The kids used to bring to Cheder every day lunch, sandwiches for lunch. So the previous Rebbe, who was from a rich family, he used to bring it on white bread, weiße Brot, and jam, which was very expensive then. Pesha, who was from a poor family, he used to bring schwarze Brot, black bread, and knobbel, and garlic. And he says, every single day I used to come to Cheder with my schwarze Brot, and the Rebbe used to come with his white Brot. And every single day, the Rebbe would beg me, Pesha, please do me a favor. Let's switch the sandwich. I love schwarze Brot. Could you please switch with me? And he said, I pashat had rachmanis on the Rebbe. I pashat had pity on him. I see he loves it so much. Okay, I'll switch it with him. Which means that the Rebbe Rashab had such Avas Yisrael. As a little child, this was pure. It was pure Avas Yisrael. He even made it in such a way that Pesha for 25, 30, 40 years later, he still thought that the reason why the Rebbe Rashab did it was because he loved Schwarze Brot. Of course, the Rebbe did it because he felt bad for Pesha, that he, Nebuch, does not have the Geschmack Brot like all the other kids have, some of them, and therefore he used to make this switch with Pesha. So in other words, we see that children have such a pureness to themselves. They are tehorim. They are so pure with how they do things. And that is why when the Rebbe had to give the Torah to Yidden, and the Rebbe asked for guarantors, as the famous Medrash says, the Yidden gave as guarantors their parents, hat nicht geholfen, it didn't help, and they gave the Nevi'im, the Tzadikim, als. The Rebbe didn't accept anybody. Whom did the Rebbe accept as guarantors? Our children, they are going to be our guarantors, and that's when the Rebbe accepted. We see something very, very interesting. There's a minhag Yisrael, there's a minhag by Yidden, as we're soon going to see the sources in Shulchan Aruch and in Medrash, that when we start with a child, the first pasuk that we read with them inside is from, when we're bringing a child into Cheder, is from Vayikra. The first pasuk that we teach a child in general as soon as he starts speaking is the pasuk Torah tziva lanu Moshe me'rasha kilas Yaakov. That's the first pasuk that he utters. But when you start bringing him into Cheder, the famous minhagim that there are, that we learn with him from a page that has honey on it, etc. Like we have a separate shir on what exactly are all the minhagim. But one of the things that we do is that we bring the first pasuk in Parshas Vayikra, which is this week's Parsha, and the child starts reading from Vayikra. And as a matter of fact, there's a very interesting story with the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe of Lubavitch. When he was a little child, and the Alte Rebbe, the first Rebbe, took care of him going into Cheder, and he saw that it says Vayikra with a little aleph, And the Tzemach Tzedek asked his grandfather, why is it that the Vayikra has a little aleph? And there's a whole long story, very interesting story, what the Alter Rebbe answered him, etc. So we see that the Minhag Yisrael is that we start from Vayikra. And the question is, why do we start from Vayikra? Why don't we start from Bereshis? The Torah starts from Bereshis. That's what we should start learning with a child. And we're going to see how the Rebbe explains it, why we learn from Vayikra, and we're going to see how all our minhagim, our customs, are not just a custom. It all encompasses the whole of Torah, the whole of creation, and this is all even when we deal with a little child. With the chinuch of a little child, we put in there everything which is in it. And therefore, let's learn a Sikha, which is in the Kutei Sichas Chelik Chav Beis in volume 22, from pages 1 through page 6, and some other places in the Kutei Sichas, where we're going to see a beautiful explanation to why do we start learning with a child from Vayikra. So, go to your source number 1. This is from Shulchan Aruch, from the Code of Jewish Law, from Beis of Kara, in Yered Deya, Hilchas Melamdim Siman Reish Mem Hey Sif Ches, in the laws of teachers. There's a whole section over there that discusses Talmud Torah and the laws of the teachers. So it says as follows, Sif Ches. Source number 1. Machnisi matinoikes leislamid ben chamish shonim shleimis. When do you take a child into cheder? From when he is 5 years old. Ubepachas mikan ein machnisin oisan. What happens if he's less than 5 years old? You don't take him into cheder. Now, there are a whole bunch of minhagim. Do you take him at age 3, 3.5, 4, 5? We're not going to get into that. In Shulchan Aruch it says that you do that at the age of 5. Comes the Ramah. The Ramah is Rabbi Islish, who always writes on the Shulchan Aruch, and he says as follows: Umikol Mokim, however, Miyad kisheyihi ben gimel shanim shleimus. Although bringing him into cheder, it's only after he's 5. But after he's 3 years old, full 3 years old, melamdin oisei oisias haTorah, we teach him letters of the Torah. Kedei sheyargil atzmi likras b'Torah. This way he'll get used to reading Torah. Even before he goes to cheder, we already train him to read oisias of Torah, letters of Torah. Says the Shach, the Sivsei Kohen, which is one of the major commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch. Source number 2 says the Shach in Sivkot Neches, Kosav HaKol Boy in Siman Ein Dal, the Kol Boy, which is a previous sefer, which is also sort of like a Shulchan Aruch. And the Kol Boy writes as follows: Maschilin loy misefer Vayikra. Where do you start learning with a child? Which Chumash do you open up? He says from Chumash Vayikra. Why? Shekein Amru Rabbanan Zal, because the Chachamim say, Maschilin letinoikes misefer Vayikra. Chachamim tell us that you start from Vayikra. Why? Lefi she'amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because the Rebbe said, Yovayu tahoirim ve'yisasku betaharis. Let the tahoirim, the pure ones, which goes on the children, and let them deal with pure stuff. What is pure stuff? The karbonis. And this is the minhag today that we learn with a child from Vayikra. This is what the Shach says. What's the source of the Shach? Where is this Chachamim that said that we start from Vayikra? Why? Because Yovayu tahoirim ve'yisasku betaharim. Go to source number 3. This is a Medrash Rabbah in Vayikra, in Parsha Zayin Siv Gimel. A Medrash that's actually in the next Parsha, in Parsha Tzav. Omar Rav Asi, said Rav Asi, why do we start with a child to learn from Toras Kohanim? Toras Kohanim is Sefer Vayikra. In the Gemara, generally when discuss Sefer Vayikra, it's called Toras Kohanim. So why don't we start with a child from Bereshis? Answers the Medrash, Elo Shatinoika is Tehirin. Children are called pure. Ve'hakorbana is Tehirin. And the korbanos, the sacrifices, are also called Tehirin. Yavayu Tehirin v'sasku b'Tehirim. Let the pure ones come and learn with the concept of Tehirim. Now the question is, what does this Tehirim mean, pure? Children are pure, that we understand, because they haven't yet tasted this world. They haven't tasted what means to do chas v'shalom and aveda, so therefore they are pure. But since when do we call korbanos tehirim? Pure. A korban is not tahir, as we're soon going to see. So there are two schools of thought why the Medrash over here calls the korbanos tehirim. The first one is a Pirush on the Medrash, the Marazav, which is Reb Wolf Einhorn. He was around 200 years ago approximately, and he has one of the major commentaries on the Medrash. If you take a Medrash Rabbi, you see on the bottom the Marazav. Marazav says as follows: V'yisasku b'tohirim. He's saying in the Medrash that the children should deal with stuff which is tahir, which is pure, which is the karbanis. Says the Marazav Chaser. There's a few words missing here in the Medrash. What does it mean? Tzarich liya is the way it should be written over here is as follows: Yovayu tahirim v'yisasku b'tahirim. Let the pure ones come and deal with pure stuff. Why? Shehev vel pihem shel tinoikos tahir belichet. Because the breath of the children is tahir, is pure, because they haven't tasted yet what an aveda is. Veha korbanis, and the korbanis. Why are they called tahirim? Because tzrichim lasek bohem betara. Because the only way a Jew can bring a korban if he is tahir, if he is clean, pure. Therefore, therefore, when a child learns Vayikra, which discusses the karbanis, it's as if they brought these karbanis in a pure way. And that's how it also says in the Medrash Tanchuma. In other words, why are the karbanis called tahirim? Not because they are tahirim, because they have to be brought betara. They have to be brought when the person is tahir. That's one school of thought. The second school of thought, why are they called tahirim? That's the Kli Yakar. The Kli Yakar also was about 400 years ago, Reb Shlomo Ephraim Felunchitz, and he writes one of the major commentaries on the Chumash, and he writes as follows in the beginning of Parsha Vayikra. Look at your source number 5. Says the Kli Yakar, Ubiyalkut Masik, and in the Medrash it says, Lama Maschilin Atinoikes, Lim of the Parsha Korbanos. Why do the children start learning for the Parsha Korbanos? So now he gives Ma Korbanos Tahirin, Afatinoikes Kain. Just like Korbanos are Tahir, are pure, so are the Tinoikes. What does it mean? So he says, V'zeh mevur. In order to understand this, we see it from somewhere else. Where do we see somewhere else? Al derech shemapik b'yalkut parsha Pinchas kvasim b'nei shana. There's Medrash in Parsha Pinchas where he talks about the karbanis that he didn't bring. What does it say? That the major karbanis are kvasim b'nei shana, which means sheep which are a year old. These are the karbanis that you bring every day. Why are we saying bringing kvasim b'nei shana? Says the Medrash, kvasim, besides for being sheep, kvasim is spelled chavav sin. He says if instead of the sin you make a samach, you're going to have the word mechapsin. The karbanos mechapsin, they clean, they wash out avenos ha'adam. What's the purpose of a sacrifice? To wash out the sins that a person does. Ve'oisim oisei ketinuk ben shana. They turn the person back like a little child, just like a little child has no avedas. So too, the carbon takes away all the avedas from a person, and he becomes like a little child. So therefore, why are the karbanos called tahirim? Because they make the person into a tahir. The Marazav learned pshat that why are they called tahirim? Because the karbanis have to be brought betahara when a person is clean. The Kli Yakar says no. The why they called tahirim? Because they take the person and they make him into a tahir. They make him into clean. The problem with both of these pirushim, the Marazav and the Kli Yakar, is that the Medrash says that the karbanis are called tahirim. The sacrifices are called tahirim, pure. According to the Marazav and according to the Kli Yakar, it's what the karbanis does to the person that the person becomes tahir or has to be tahir, whichever way. That's not what the Medrash is saying about why the children are starting to learn from Vayikra. The Medrash says that the children start learning from Vayikra because the children are called pure and the karbanis are called pure. So why are the karbanis called pure? Not only that, whenever we talk about karbanis, we never use the expression tahir. What do we use? Look at your source number 6. When we talk the Rambam, when he has the halachas of karbanis, what does he say? The Rambam says in Hilchis Yisurim Mizbeach Bitchilasei, in the beginning of halachas of Yisurim Mizbeach, what are the things you are allowed to bring on the Mizbeach, on the altar? Says the Rambam, mitzvahs esei liyois kol ha-korbanos The mitzvah of the Eibishter is that all the karbonis should be two things. Tmimim, they have to be complete, no blemishes, no mumin. Umuvcharin, and they have to be of the choicest stuff, the best that a person has. So we have tmimim and muvcharim. These are the two things. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, tamim yihiyeh lerotzin, that if the carbon is complete, full, then he is going to be accepted by the Eibishter. Zu mitzvah sesei. But Rambam doesn't say that the carbonis also have to be tahirim, they have to be tahir. So why it is our medrash using the expression Yavayu Tahirim Visasku B'Tahirim? Why is using karbonis called Tahirim? So there are some Mefarshim that want to answer that we do find in one place that the karbonis are called Tahirim. Where they're called Tahirim? Go to your source number 7. This is the Gemara in Zvachim Daf Kuf Tes Vav on the base, and the Gemara says as follows. Source number 7. Achelehu kama mishkan, until the mishkan was set up. Hakol ksheidin lehakriv. You're allowed to bring anything as a carbon. Behema, chaya, oif, all types of animals, birds, etc. Zcharim, nekeves, male, females. Tmimin ubalemumin, whether they're complete or even if they have any blemishes, they're sick, they're ill. Tahirin avoloitmein. There was one condition. They had to be tahir and not tamei. They had to be pure and not impure. Now the Gemara is going to try to analyze what is this tahir and tamei by a karm. So later the Gemara says, Amar Mar, we said before in the Gemara, Hakoil kshein lehakrib, that you're allowed to bring any type of animal. Says the Gemara, Menohani mili, how do you know? But Rav Huna said, Rav Huna, the Amar Kra, because it says in the pasuk, Vayiven Noach mizbeach Lashem. Noach built a mizbeach, a altar for the Eibishter, after he came out from the Teva, after he came out from the ark, after the Mabul, and what happened? Vayikach mikol habehema hatohira umikol ha'oif hatohir, and he brought from every behema which is tahir, and from every oif, from every bird which is tahir. Frag the Gemara, so the Gemara asked, Umi havut meyinu tahirim bahishaita? In the time of Noach, was there such a thing as tahir and tamei? This was before the time that the Torah was given. So what's tahir and what's tamei? What's pure, what's impure? Amar Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonason. So Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said in the name of Rabbi Yonason, Mei oison shelenev dabohen aveira. What made tahir and tamei? Someone that no aveira was done with this animal. Says the Gemara, how is Noach supposed to know which one an aveira was done? Answers the Gemara, Rav Chizda. The Amar Rav Chizda says, Havir on the Fnei HaTeva, what Noach did, he brought all these animals in front of the Teva. Kol shehateva kol tason, all those that the Teva accepted them, beyodua shehu tahir, then he knew that it was tahir. Ein hateva kol tason, what happens if the Teva rejected these animals? Obviously this was a miracle. Beyodua shehin tmeyin, then we know that they are tamei. So tahir and tamei over here goes on the actual carbon. That those who are tahir, were pure, that was no aveda done, made it into the Teva, and Noach was able to bring it later as a carbon. Mashenk, and those that were not tahir, those didn't make it into the Teva, so then those are considered tamei. So what's the connection to the children? Just like the children are not mechuyev, they don't have any obligation to bring any karbanos, right? So this is just like the karbanos before Matan Torah that Noach brought. Just like Noach didn't have to bring karbanos, and the karbanos of Noach were called tahirin, so too a child, when he does his learning of Torah before the time of the chinuch, he is not obligated in learning Torah. And here's the connection: let the ones who are pure, who are not obligated to learn, and they will do this and learn about the karbonis, which Noach was not obligated to do. This is basically the connection where we see the tahirim and the tahirim. So of course this is it's interesting how we use the word tahirim, but in the Medrash we said very clear that what are the kids learning? They are starting Vayikra. If they would have learned the karbanis of Noach, you're right. But they are starting to learn from Vayikra, which is the karbanis of later, not the karbanis of Noach. So why are we saying Yavayu Tahirin, Visasku B'Tahirim? Why are we calling the karbanis of later as Tahirim. We don't find any place that they are called Tahirim. So we're back to square one. Why are we saying Yavayu Tahirim v'sasku b'Tahirim? To make a long story short, it's very interesting that the only time when we find the word Tahirim by Karbanis is where? By Noach. So obviously there must be a connection here between Noach, the Karbanis, the children, and what we're going to do now is we're going to try to analyze who is this Noach. Who is this Noach? What does this Noach do? What is his status? Then we're going to analyze what are his Karbanis. Then we're going to analyze what are the children. And we're going to see this beautiful puzzle coming into place. And we're going to find out something unbelievable. What's behind this magnificent minhag of learning from Parsha Vayikra. What is it? Let's start with Noach. Let's analyze Noach. Did Noach fulfill mitzvahs? Did Noach, can we say on Noach, does it say anywhere that Noach kiyem, Noach is kol ha-Torah? Did Noach fulfill the Torah? Nowhere. Not, at least not that I know of. Yeah, there is one place in Rashi where we're going to see soon where Rashi says that Noach learned Torah, lamad Torah. But fulfilling mitzvahs? No. That we don't find by Noach. Who is the first person that we find that fulfilled mitzvahs? Before Matan Torah. Who is the first person? Who's the first person? Yeah, Avraham Avinu. By Avraham Avinu it says that Kiyam Avraham Avinu is kol ha-Torah kula. Ad shelei nitnu, before it was given. Avraham Avinu kept the whole Torah. And Rashi even brings it in Chumash. Look at your source number 8. And we're going to see that the first one who practiced Torah was Avraham Avinu. Where do we see it? Look at source number 8. The Pasha told us in Perik Chavav Pasuk Hey. What does the Pasuk say? The Rebbe tells Yitzchak, because Avraham Avinu, your father, listened to me. He watched, he observed all my observances, my mitzvahs, my statutes, my Torahs. And if you look in Rashi, but the Pasha told us I didn't bring them all here. But if you look in Rashi, Rashi says that Avraham Avinu kept even Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah. Avraham Avinu even kept the mitzvahs the Rabbanan, the mitzvahs from the Chachamim. And Avraham Avinu even kept Halacha L'Moshe Misinai. Everything Avraham Avinu kept. Not only Avraham Avinu. If you look at Chumash, look at source number 9, Parshash Vayishlach. When Yaakov sent the famous messengers to his brother Esav, what did he say? Tell my brother, Perik Lamed Pasuk, hey, what does the Pasuk say? Vayishlach Esav Leimer, he sent him over to his brother Esav and he said, this is what you should tell my master Esav. Yaakov, this is what your slave, your brother Yaakov said. Im Lavan Garti, I lived with Lavan. What does it mean I lived with Lavan? Says Rashi, Garti, the word Garti is Gimel Reish Taf Yud, numeric value of 613. Says Rashi, Garti vetaryag mitzvahs shamarti. I observed all the 613 mitzvahs. So we see here clearly that the Avos fulfilled all the 630 mitzvahs. Now, they didn't actually do all the 630 mitzvahs. They did some of them, part of them. We're not going to go now into the details, but there is definitely an indication here that although the Torah was not yet given, but there was some type of observance of Torah mitzvahs on the part of the Avos. Which means that we have 3 stages how the Torah came into being into this world. The obvious and simple stage is when Hashem came down and gave the Torah on Matan Torah. When was that? In the year 2448. Matan Torah. Once the Rebbe gave the Torah, everybody has to fulfill Torah mitzvahs. However, the Rebbe did not give the Torah to Adam Rishon. The Rebbe took 2,500 years almost for him to come down and give the Torah in this world. That's simple. Before that, there was a stage from Avraham Avinu until Matan Torah, where a certain practice of Torah was done, a certain limited practice, but it was done. Before that, from creation of the world until Avraham Avinu, we don't find anywhere the concept of any practice of doing mitzvahs. So therefore, Noach, in which category is Noach? 1, 2, or 3? Is he from creation of the world till Avram, or from Avram? Is he part of those who got the Torah? Of course not. The Torah was given in the year 2,500. Is he part of the Avram Avinu people that practiced? No. He's before that. In his time, there was no such thing as practice any mitzvahs. So now let's try to analyze the karbanos that Noach brought. What are those? Noach didn't practice anything of the Torah. So these karbanos that he brought, what are they? And why do we call them tahirim? Why? Why are we calling the karbanos of Noach tahirim? And we don't even know why he brought karbanos. He didn't have to. There was no mitzvah. The whole concept of karbanos is supposed to be a mitzvah. He had no mitzvah. Let's analyze the karbanos of Noach. Go to your source number 10. What does it say in the Torah in Parsha Noach? Perek Zayin Pasuk Beis. Mikol ha-behema ha-tahoira. From all the behemoths which are tahir, which are pure, tikach lecha shiva ish ve'ishtei. You should take 7. The Rebbe is telling Noach, from all the tahir, from all the pure ones, you should bring 7 into the teva. Umin ha-behema sher loy tahoira, and from the behema which is not tahir, not pure, shnaim ish ve'ishtei. You should bring 2 in the teva. Comes Rashi, your source number 11, and he says, ha-tahoira, yeah? He says, what does tahoira mean? Pure. How do you know what's pure? And says Rashi, ha-asida lihiyos tahoira li-Yisrael. The Rebbe told Noach he should take pure animals. What does pure mean? That they are going to be pure for the Yidden. Later, another couple of 100 years. Says Rashi, lamadnu shelamad Noach Torah. We see from here that Noach learned Torah. So by these karbanos of Noach, we find 2 opposites. On the one hand, his karbanos, there was no mitzvah, there was no, the Torah wasn't given and he didn't practice anything. At the same time, he brought karbanos which represent the karbanos of the Yidden later. Hey, that's something very interesting. What does Noach have to do with the Yidden later? What's the connection here? Noach is Noach. The Yidden later is a couple of 100 years after Matan Torah. Well, if you tell me that Avram Avinu did Bris Milah, for example, and his grandchildren did it, I can understand. Avram Avinu is the grandfather of the Yidden. And Avram Avinu was the first Jew, etc. Noach, how does Noach get to the Yidden? So here we come to a beautiful, beautiful thing that we do on Rosh Hashanah. And this will explain this whole story of the children. Look at your source number 12. In Rosh Hashanah, in Musaf, the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah is divided into 3 parts. The first part is called Malchiyos, where we have to say certain psukim, certain verses that discuss the concept that God is the king of the world. The second part is Zichronos, that we tell God that He should remember all kinds of things that happened in the past. He should remember the Akedah of Yitzchak, He should remember other things. And the third part is called Shofaros. When we look in Zichronos, look in your source number 12, we're going to see something very interesting. We say to the Eibishter, you remember everything that people did, and also all the creations and all the people and all their actions. What's the first thing that we ask Hashem to remember? Vegam es Noach be'ava zacharta. And even Noach you remembered be'ava, with love. What's this love over here? And if we continue, we bring a pasuk. Vayizkar elikim es Noach ve'eis kol achaya ve'eis kol abheima asher itei bateva. The Rebbe remembered all the animals and everything that he had in the teva. The next pasuk that we bring is that the Yidden were crying in Mitzrayim, and the Rebbe vayishma elikim es na'akosam. The Rebbe heard their cry, their plea. Vayizkar elikim es brisa, and the Rebbe remembered the covenant as Avram, as Yitzchak, as Yaakov, and then vayizkar lohem brisa. The Rebbe remembered the covenant they did with the Yidden. I understand if we're telling the Eibishter to remember how the Yidden cried to him, and the covenant the Yidden had with the Eibishter, the covenant that Avraham Avinu had with the Eibishter, I can understand. But what does on Rosh Hashanah we bring what the Eibishter remembered Noach? What did the Eibishter remember over here? He remembered a whole bunch of animals. What does he remember over here? Comes the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Rebbe that we explained before, the story with the sandwich. And the Rebbe Rashab has one of his most famous Maimorim. It's called Sefer HaMaimorim Tov Reish Ayin Beis. And he explains as follows. Look at your source number 13. What is this that we're saying that the Rebbe remembers everything that was created, or everything that the people do? Says the Rebbe Rashab, Olam HaNetzal. This goes on one of the high worlds, the spiritual world, which is explained in Chassidus. In other words, comes on Rosh Hashanah, we ask the Eibishter to rejuvenate the whole world with all the spiritual worlds too. Because at a certain extent, Rosh Hashanah, everything comes to a stop. And we have to rejuvenate this by making again, crowning God for the King of the world. So we ask God to remember the early worlds, the top worlds. Ufayket kol yitzurei kedem goes also on spiritual worlds. Olam Yisrael sof shelamayla matzilus. She'al kulam tzrichim hazikarim b'Rosh Hashanah. We need that the Rebbe should remember all of these spiritual worlds on Rosh Hashanah. How does the Rebbe remember all of the worlds that he has to rejuvenate them? Says the Rebbe, Val kolze hu nizker kaviyochel al yedei hazikaron de neshamas Yisrael. When the Rebbe remembers that there's something called neshamas Yisrael, the neshamas of the Yidden, and the neshamas of the Yidden are here to make this place into a dwelling place for Hashem. So in honor of the neshamas Yisrael, he remembers all the worlds. Where do we see that the Rebbe, the whole remembrance is for neshamas Yisrael, for the Yidden? Says the Rebbe, K'meshe Omar, as we say in the davening, Vegam es Noach be'ava zacharta. That even Noach you remembered, and we finish it with Zeicher Abris de Avram and Moshe. That we finish with the covenant of Avram and Moshe. Val yedeize nizkar al kol ma'aseh bereishis. Through this, that he's remembering Noach, he remembers the covenant of Avram, the covenant of Moshe, and through that, the whole creation. How does Noach get into the picture here? And he finishes, the Rebbe, Hine hazikar and hoya Noach mitad atzmai. The Rebbe remembered Noach. Why did he remember Noach? Vehainu mitzad etzem mailas nishmais Yisrael. Because the Rebbe had in mind the Yidden. Noach, because of him, came later out Neshamas Yisrael, who are going to make this world into the proper place. So therefore, we remember Noach, because what does Noach represent? The Neshamas of the Yidden. In other words, we find something very interesting here about Noach. When the Rebbe we talk about Yidden, well, when we look at the Yidden per se, the way they are, the Yidden, there's something which is called Torah mitzvahs. The Yidden receive Torah and mitzvahs. So there are some who do more, there are some who do less. Because Torah mitzvahs are the tools with which a person connects himself to the Eibishter. So if a person does more, he's considered a tzaddik. If a person does less, he's considered something else. So that's one aspect. When the Eibishter looks at Yidden, though not from Torah mitzvahs point of view, he looks at them from Noach. That's before Torah, before anything. How does he look at the Yidden? Neshamas Yisrael. An unconditional bond that the Rebbe has with the Yidden. This is something which is unconditional. It's a love that Hashem has for the Yidden because they are Yidden, period. In other words, after the Yidden receive the Torah, then Yidden are looked at different levels, as we all know. There's Tzaddik, Beinonim, etc. That's all after Matan Torah. In the time of Avraham Avinu, it was half and half. In the time of Noach, the Rebbe looks at Noach, he sees the Yidden coming out of Noach. What does he see? Neshamas Yisrael, the Yidden per se, in a pure way, above Torah mitzvahs before anything. It's unconditional. It's absolute bond between the Rebbe and the Yidden. That's the difference of how the Rebbe looks at Yidden from Noach's point of view, or how the Rebbe looks at Yidden after Matan Torah. After Matan Torah, it's already in a certain system. Before Matan Torah, in the time of Noach, no system at all, unconditional connection. And that is why on Rosh Hashanah, the first one that we mention that the Rebbe should remember is Noach. What's this unconditional love? A very simple example to it. Look at source number 14. A father with his children. You have a bond that a father has with children. Oh, this child is smart. This one is not so smart. And, he looks at them with different levels. But when he has to start thinking of his children, as the bond of a father to children, at that level, there is no difference what the children accomplished or how they are, because they are his children. It's a natural bond that a father has with his children. Look at the source number 14. The Gemara in Kiddushin Daf Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. The Gemara says as follows: Banim atem l'Hashem Elokeichem. That the children, the Yidden, are considered like children to the Eibishter. Says the Gemara, Bisman shatem noyhagim minhag banim. When the Yidden conduct themselves with the Eibishter like children, atem kruim banim, you are considered children. Ein atem noyagim minak banim, but if you don't conduct yourself like children, ein atem kruim banim, you're not considered children. This is Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Comes Rabbi Meir and says, Rabbi Meir Aimer, Ben kachu ben kach atem kruim banim. Whether you conduct yourself properly, when you don't conduct yourself properly, the Eibishter looks at Yidden as banim, as children, regardless of what they are. So there is a lower level where over there a person is judged based on his actions. But then there's a higher level of the Yidden, mitzad der neshama, that over there's an unconditional bond between the Yidden and the Eibishter. And that is the concept of Noach. Oh, so if that's the case, that's the concept of Noach, now we will understand the connection to the Karbonos. Why? Torah and mitzvahs, as we said before, this is how a person connects to the Eibishter. And if a person chas v'shalom does an aveira, what happens? So he messes up his relationship with the Eibishter, and then he has to do tshuva or whatever he has to do in order to get back to take care of that aveira. What is the concept of karbonis? Karbonis is something way above Torah mitzvahs. What is karbonis? Let's look at number 15, and then we will understand this whole picture. It's going to be beautiful. Let's look what Alter Rebbe says in the Geras HaTshuva in Perik Beis. Alter Rebbe, in his third section in the Tanya, he explains what is this concept of karbonis. We're going to see how Noach and karbonis is the exact same concept. Just like Noach accomplishes that unconditional love between Yidden and the Eibishter because of their neshama, because of what they are, children of the Eibishter, so too karbonis do that same exact thing. They take a person unconditional of his situation and they bring him a carbon, karev, close to the Eibishter. How do we see that? Look at source number 15, Geras HaTshuva. In the second chapter, in the first chapter, the Alter Rebbe explains what happens when somebody does an aveira, God forbid, he does a transgression. So then he has to clean it up. So he does it either through tshuva, through repentance, return, or he does it through unfortunately, through fasting or other things. Says the Alter Rebbe in the second chapter, your source number 15. This is all when we're talking about atoning for the sin that the person did. That through the fact that he did tshuva or fasting or whatever, he got atoned for what he transgressed, what the king told him to do. However, ultimately he messed up his relationship with Hashem. So although he took care of the sin, but now the Eibishter doesn't look at him the same way. It's like when two people, you have a friend and you did something wrong to him, and then later you ask, I'm sorry. So of course he will forgive you, but the relationship is not the same. So therefore says the Alter Rebbe, Amnom, sheyi yeleratzen lifnei Hashem. In order for a person to be able to put himself, to restore himself to the original state how he was with the Eibishter, in other words, being that he did an Aveda, and now he cleaned up the Aveda, but the relationship between him and the Eibishter is not the same as before, because now the relationship is already as someone who did something wrong and he cleaned it up. In order that from now on the Eibishter should have pleasure from his avodah, he has to bring a sacrifice, a carbon, which means tshuva and the tiniest, all these things, they make that the sin is gone. But what restores the connection, the bond between a person and the Eibishter, that the carbon does, the sacrifice. And then v'nirtzaloi, and then the Eibishter is going to be very happy with this person. And the Alter Rebbe brings an example, like a person who did something wrong with his relationship to the king, and then came some intervene people, and intervened for him to the king. And the king forgave him, still in all, what does the person do? He doesn't just, it doesn't suffice himself with the fact that the king said, I'm sorry, that the king said, yes, I'm forgiving you. He sends a present to the king. So then the king will want to see him again in a very pleasurable way. As it says in the pasuk about the karbonis, that the karbonis, when it's tamim, when it's complete with no blemishes, then the Rebishter is very happy with this carbon. So what happens over here is we find that karbonis do something which is even higher than Torah mitzvahs. The whole concept of Torah mitzvahs is how a person connects himself with Rebishter. This is very something in a limited way. It's conditioned. He does more mitzvahs, he's more connected. He does less mitzvahs, he's less connected. That's on a lower level. The karbonos, they are on a higher level than Torah mitzvahs. What they do is they make kiruv, they connect the person with the Eibishter in an unconditional way. Now that we understand that there's two ways how a person can connect himself to the Eibishter, either with conditions, with Torah mitzvahs, or something which is above Torah mitzvahs, which is karbonos. Now we understand why the children learn to think of karbonos. What did we say before about Noach? What does Noach represent? Noach represents the unconditional connection between Yidden and the Eibishter, before Matan Torah, before anything. This is what Noach does. Therefore, the karbonos that Noach brought, they are, because the Yidden are going to bring these karbonis, but they are not the same karbonis as then. They are karbonis which are considered tehorim. They are considered pure because they do what the real thing of karbonis is, make that unconditional connection between Yidden and the Eibishter. If that's what it is, that's what they call tehorim, pure, because they are unconditional. Now we understand why we learned this with the children. Just like we said before, that there are three stages in Torah. The first stage is from creation of the world until Avraham Avinu, when there was absolutely no Torah, no practice, nothing. That was the time of Noach. The second one is between Avraham Avinu and Matan Torah and the year 2448, when over there was already some practice, but it wasn't full-fledged practice because the Torah wasn't given yet. The third stage is after Matan Torah, when the Yidden had to fulfill all the 630 mitzvahs. So too, in a person, you also have these three stages. Stage number one is from when a child is born until he is 5 years old, when he goes to Cheder. When he starts going to Cheder, between 5 and 12, this is the area of chinuch. This is the area of education, when he starts already practicing a little bit, just like sort of like the period between Avram and Matan Torah. That is the time of chinuch. But from when a child is born until he's 5 years old, he is not mechuyev in anything, he hardly practices anything. It's an unconditional connection between him and the Eibishter. After Bar Mitzvah, that's the third stage, just like after receiving of the Torah. So therefore, when we take a little child who is before 5 years old, he's only 3 years old, a kleine pitzele, he is as pure as anything. What is his connection to the Eibishter? Through Torah mitzvahs? No. A child after 5, he starts doing some mitzvahs, so that starts becoming his connection. But when a child is before 5 years old, he has one connection with the Eibishter, the fact that he is a Jewish child. That's it. It's an unconditional connection. It's a love, a bond that the Eibishter has with this pure child. Therefore, what do we do? Yavayu Tahirim, a pure child, which is connection to the Eibishter, is unconditional, it's pure. What does he do? He learns Tahirim, he learns the karbonis, which are considered Tahirim. Which karbonis? The karbonis that obviously Parsha Vayikra of the Yidden, but how they are called Tahirim, which is the karbonis of Noach. Why? Because Noach is the one that represents Yidden, how they are connected unconditionally with the Eibishter in a very pure way. And that is why we mention it on Rosh Hashanah as the first remembrance that the Eibishter should remember Noach. Why? Because the Yidden, the way they are in Noach's story, they are unconditionally connected to the Eibishter without any strings attached. So if that's the case, now we understand why the children start from Parshas Vayikra. So far so good. Beautiful, unbelievable. So that's what we understand. We brought before that why are they called Tahirim? We had the Kliyakor, we had the Marazav, because the Yidden are Tahir at that time, or because they make the person Tahir. No. The reason why they are called Tahirim, because Karbonis, they are the tool with which a Jew gets connected to the Eibishter in an unconditional way, just the way Noach did it, and that's what a little child represents. So what we see from here, that an unbelievable thing, that a little child, even before Chinuch, when he's still 3 years old, what does he do? He represents the essence of Yidden. And he represents the whole creation. How does the creation work? There's the first part, which is from the Eibishter, from the creation until Avraham Avinu. And that is where it all started, where it was tahir, where it was pure. This is what a child represents. And that is why we teach a child from Parshas Vayikra. So what we see over here, the importance of Minhagi Yisrael, of the customs that you didn't have, and all customs, when we start going into the source of them, we find out some unbelievable things. And therefore we have to work as toil in learning of Torah and trying to understand these minhagim, and to go into the deep explanation and reasons for them. And this will show us how every little child, even before he gets to chinuch, how important he is. And of course, eventually later, he will continue doing what he did during this time of his chinuch, and in Mirz Hashem, he will grow up to be a giant in the people of Am Yisrael, and he will obviously do the correct thing. So at least now we understand why we learn with the children from Parshas Vayikra. And as we say by Chassidim, that the Sefer of Vayikra always starts right before the month of Nisan. In other words, being that when we start learning Vayikra, we're always within 30 days B'derech Klal of the Rebbe's birthday, of Yud Aleph Nisan, which this was when the Rebbe was born, and this was the time of the unconditional love between a Yid and the Eibishter. And therefore, in this time, we basically send a thank you to the Eibishter for giving us the Rebbe, who has given us this beautiful explanations on Minhagi Yisrael and all the other explanations in Torah that the Rebbe gave us throughout Likutei Sichos, Maimarim, Reshimos, letters, etc. And the main thing is that through that we will do the minhagim correctly, and through that the children will learn Parsha Vayikra about the Karbonis. So not only are we going to learn about the Karbonis, but the Eibishter Mirz Hashem will give us the Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi, the third Beis Hamikdash, speedily today, and we will be able to bring the Karbonis in the most taharadike way, in the most pure way, in the Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi, together with Mashiach Tzidkenu, Teikef Umiyad Mamash.